I haven't seen her in a lot. She's very, very No. Hi, I'm sitting here. I don't know where you're sitting.
I'll probably just sit over there.
Oh, sit with Becky? Fine. I see how it is. I love you too, sort of. I'm kidding. I'm giving you a hard time. Bring it back here. I didn't know where you were sitting. Whatever works best. Oh, it's going.
Good morning, church. Hello. We are live. We are live on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, guys. For church. Welcome. We're going to ask you to stand this morning. I know you're probably not seeing Danny, but pray for him as he is with his family in Oklahoma because his stepdad passed away. So pray for traveling mercies. But we'll go ahead and pray right now before we sing. Father, thank you so much for this wonderful day that we can come and gather inside your church, Lord. And I pray that you'll be with all of us, the ones that are here and online. Pray that we'll all be blessed with the music that we'll be singing, with the message that we're going to be hearing. And thank you, Lord, for being you. And I pray that you'll just continue to show us your kindness. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right, if you're unfamiliar with this song, just go ahead and follow right with us. So we're going to be singing kindness.
Well, good morning. Is this on?
Yeah.
You did? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Does it sound like an echo? Well, first let's take a minute. We're not greeting each other, going around and hugging and that. But let's just take a minute and pray for each other. Ask the Lord to put somebody from our body or just wherever on your heart. As Sherilyn said, Danny's in Oklahoma. His stepfather, his birth mom's husband passed away, and so he's in Mariana or there. So just focus on somebody instead of shaking their hand. Pray for him. So Heavenly Father, we thank you that you have made us to be a body, Lord, and we all are different parts. We're all critical, Lord. And I just pray that we be the best parts of the body that we can be by your grace and by your mercy. And that we pray for each other. We pray that in a challenging time we continue that, Lord, we just go closer to you because we're all closer to you, we'll be closer to each other and loving each other. And we just thank you, Father, for the grace that you have extended to us through Jesus. And I just pray that we can pass that grace on. I ask that in our service today that you will be honored. I pray that your word will be strong, that the worship of your name will be strong, and will fill us up, Lord, for the week ahead. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Again, the offering will not be passed. There is an offering box back by the sound room, and so feel free to put your offering in that. So you can give it to myself or Becky or Sherilyn, and we appreciate your continued support of our church, so we can move forward that. Wednesday night we had a little movie, and that went very well. So hopefully we'll be looking at doing some of those again in the future, and we had a good time Wednesday night. Wednesday nights, Bible studies. Some people have been asking about having them here at the church. I know that people still want to do them on Zoom, but if you want to come here to the church and please talk to me. If there's nothing, just we'll set up at least having part here and part still on Zoom. Lord, we thank you for today. Bless our offering. I thank you for giving us the ability to give. Lord, what an awesome thing to be able to give. And we think you have ministered to us and you have touched us and provided for us. And so we can just give from what you have given to us. Lord, we ask that as we worship, that you lift our hearts and our focus will be on you. First we looked at last week to set our minds on things above, not on earthly things. Lord, help us to set our mind on things above. Right.
All right, feel free to stand for our worship this morning.
Galaxies spin in the heavenly dance, oh God, all that you are, so overwhelming. I hear the sound of your voice, all at once is a gentle and thundering noise, oh God, all that you are, so overwhelming. I design myself in you, captivated by your beauty. I'm overwhelmed by you. God, I run into your arms, unashamed because of wonderful. You are beautiful. Oh God, there is no one more beautiful. You are beautiful. God, you are the most beautiful. You are wonderful. You are wonderful. Oh God, there is no one more wonderful. You are wonderful. God, you are the most wonderful. You are glorious. You are glorious. Oh God, there is no one more glorious. You are glorious. God, you are the most glorious. I delight myself in you, in the glory of your presence. I'm overwhelmed by you. God, I run into your arms, unashamed because of mercy. I'm overwhelmed by you.
So we're continuing in 1 Peter. If you'd like to take the Bibles out, we're going to be in chapter 4. And we finished 3 chapters of 1 Peter already, pretty nearly, for a couple months. We're going to look at chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. If you went to college like I did, I think that most people who start college, the goal is to graduate. You want to walk out of there with a diploma, right? I mean, most people, except for junior colleges, some of the junior colleges, people just like to go and get lost for about 7 years and then come back. And if you want to get a diploma, you have to know what's required. And when you start college, there are courses that are required. There's almost always there's a language requirement, a math requirement, a science requirement. Then you also have electives that you can take. For all of you who've ever gone to school, did you ever take a class or ever remember a class being offered in suffering? So Suffering 101, the professor lectures you on how to suffer and that. I don't think there are any classes for that. But that's strange because the truth is, in life, suffering is not an elective course, it's a required course. Nobody gets out of life without some type of suffering. It's just the way it is. At least if I'm reading the Bible correctly for a Christian, the Bible never says if you suffer, it says when you suffer. Jesus said, if they hated me, they're going to hate you. There's going to be some type of suffering. So it seems like that's something that's easy to gloss over in the scripture and to miss, but it cannot see. But if you really read with an eye for it, Peter, Paul, John, Jesus, everybody talked about the reality that as a believer, there is suffering. And so we're going to take a look at this morning what I'm calling the destinations of suffering. It's from 1 Peter chapter 4, and reading verses 1 through 11. And we're going to kind of dive into it, and hopefully it'll all make sense when we get to the end. But it's really quite simple. Suffering is a required course in Christianity, and our choice is what we do with it. And so, really, there's 2 destinations we're going to look at. So let's go to 1 Peter chapter 4, starting with verse 1. It says, "Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude, because he who has suffered in his body is done with sin. As a result, he does not live the rest of his earthly life for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. For you have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. They think it strange that you do not plunge in with them into the same flood of dissipation, and they heap abuse upon you. But they will have to give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is the reason the gospel was preached, even to those who are now dead, so that they might be judged according to men in regard to the body, but live according to God in regard to the Spirit. The end of all things is near. Therefore be clear-minded and self-controlled, so that you can pray. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others, faithfully administering God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, he should speak as one speaking the very words of God. If anyone serves, he should do it with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18 says, Therefore do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we have our eyes we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. So we're focusing, our goal is not with the things that we can see, but it's what we can't see. And it's important to know that Paul wrote this letter to the Corinthians, and he said, our light and momentary troubles. Well, how light and momentary were Paul's troubles? He was stoned. He was within a breath of death. He was in prison. And yet he called those his light and momentary troubles. And they all, from Paul's purpose and perspective, they were all working something good, a glory that outweighs what the suffering is. We looked at recently that when we have trials or problems that lead to suffering, James 1:2 says, Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Luke 9:23 and 24 says, Then he said to them all, If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Did Jesus suffer on the cross? Yes. If we take up our cross, probably the same thing. But that's how we follow him. We want to go where he went. Verse 24, For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake, for me, will save it. So in order to find our life, we need to lose it for the sake of Jesus. So what we're going to do now is, this is the crash course on suffering. I think that it's too easy just to kind of lump all suffering together. Oh, I'm suffering. I'm having a hard time. But it's critical to me that we understand there are different kinds of suffering that come for different reasons, and they come for different purposes. And I think that if you see that, it will allow you to better be prepared to deal with the suffering that goes on in your life, and to understand it, and to see God's purpose in it. So, the list that you see there is not something that I came up with on my own. It came from studying from various sources, but I found it to be really pretty educational and pretty encouraging when you think about it, because a lot of suffering really does represent it. It shows who we are in the Lord. So one of the first kinds of suffering is what I call original sin suffering. Original sin suffering. Romans 5:12 says, Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all men because all sinned. Because we live in a sinful fallen world, there is going to be suffering. There is just no way around that. I say Adam got the apple, and we got the curse. The result of the curse is that women, when the kidney finishes his birth, it will be there'll be some pain involved in that. Men, when we work by the sweat of our brow. We live in a fallen world. because of original sin, and so there is going to be suffering. The next kind of suffering is what I call demonic suffering. We have an enemy who wants to steal, kill, and destroy from us. He's out to get us, and sometimes he does a better job of coming after us than we do defending against him. The reality is that it often has nothing to do with who we are in the Lord, but it has to do with what's going on in the spiritual realms. And Job is a very good example of that. Job was, according to the book of Job, he really hadn't done anything wrong, but he became kind of a pawn in the battle between Satan and God, and he lost everything. And yet he remained faithful. He suffered because we live in a spiritual warfare. Next is what I call victim suffering. Sometimes we suffer because somebody wants to hurt us. Good example of that is the parable of the Good Samaritan. The man who was beaten by robbers, and what did he have done wrong? What did he do to deserve that? Absolutely nothing. He was a victim of being in a time and in a place where evil men wanted to rob somebody, and he was the one who chose to rob. And so he suffered because he was a victim. Now, I certainly believe that more people claim to be victims, but really are victims. And yet, we can't deny the reality that there are a lot of people who are fallen victims to evil things in this world today. So there is victim suffering as well. There's also collective suffering, what I would call collective suffering. It's just something that we all kind of go through together. I think COVID-19 is actually a good example of that. I mean, we're all in this together. Some are more in it than others. I like that. I think somebody in the radio said that all the Hollywood stars are going to get in their yachts and go on in the water and spell we're all in this together with their yachts. But the truth is, it's what we're having to go through with this is just kind of a collective thing. We're going through it. For some people that leads to depression, and for some people other things. So it's just something that happens in the course of life. As I get older, it seems like collective suffering is happening a lot more. I don't remember all the stuff going through all the stuff when I was a kid. Maybe it's because I was a kid that we're going through now. But sometimes it's just collective suffering. We all go through it together. And then there's disciplinary suffering. Disciplinary suffering. The Bible is clear. God disciplines those he loves. If you're a parent, hopefully you understand disciplinary suffering. If you were the child of a parent, which obviously we are, hopefully you understand disciplinary suffering, because Hebrews 12:11 says, no discipline seems pleasant at the time. Amen to that? No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. So sometimes we suffer because of discipline, but discipline is not supposed to be a bad thing. It's supposed to be a good thing that trains us up into righteousness and teaches us how to go. And sometimes in that course of that discipline, we learn things that we would never learn any other way. Another type of suffering is persecution suffering. That is, as I said, it's said that they hate you, they're going to hate you. And all around the world today, people are persecuted because they love Jesus. November 1st this year is the International Day of Prayer for the Persecuted Church. Voice of the Martyrs has already created the video for this year. It's about a woman named Jeanette from the Central African Republic. If you're a Christian in the Central African Republic, you deal with persecution from Islam, and there is also going through a civil war right now. And so the believers are just on the wrong side of everything. Sometimes we suffer because we take a stand for God, and that's the best kind of suffering there is. And there's also empathetic suffering. And what that is if I have someone close to me, say Donna has an injury or that, I feel the pain of that. I live with that. I'm personally doing fine, but she's hurting, so I'm hurting as well. And sometimes that's the hardest type of suffering because you can't really do anything about it. Obviously you can pray, you can see God in that, but in a very real way, that often is the hardest type of suffering. And then there's testimonial suffering. And what I mean by that is sometimes you can suffer so you can be a testimony to God. And I saw that in some of the news accounts with the fire, the Valley Fire was the one closest to us, right? In Alpine and that. And people who lost their homes say, well, I lost my home, but that's okay because I have something more. I have an eternal home with Jesus in heaven. So they went through the suffering of losing that, but they also had a platform to tell all of the people watching them that their hope isn't in their home. It's in Jesus. It's a way to give testimony. Even though you suffer, you can give testimony to God. Another example of that is I've seen these where someone has a family member who's murdered, and as hard as that is, the person says, yes, I can forgive them because Jesus forgave me. If Jesus forgave me, how can I not forgive them? So you go through a time of very difficult, one of the hardest things you can go through, and yet you take that opportunity for it to be a testimony to the goodness of God. Then there's providential suffering. That's kind of a hard one because it intimates, which is true, that sometimes God has a hand in our suffering. And I think that let's look at the life of Joseph as a beautiful example of providential suffering. Joseph went through a lot of things that he would have definitely preferred not to have to go through. He was sold into slavery. He was in prison. He was falsely accused. He was making a pass at his boss's wife. All of those things were wrong, and they had nothing to do with him. And yet he suffered from them. But God used that process of providential suffering to make him the second most powerful man in the world at that time. And the first most powerful man in the world didn't really do anything without consulting Joseph. Isn't that an amazing thing? That was all suffering that Joseph went through, but it led to, and not only to Joseph receiving that power, but also to his family being saved from that famine there. Next is what I just call mysterious suffering. And essentially, mysterious suffering is, I don't know why it's happening, you don't know why it's happening, nobody really knows why it's happening. I never smoked a cigarette in my life, and yet I have lung cancer. How did that happen? Sometimes it's just a mystery. And that's when we know it's to be trusting God. Then there's preventative suffering. Sometimes we suffer so we don't do anything more stupid. I think alcohol can be a good example of that. If you've ever gotten drunk to the point where you wake up and you just don't want to be alive, you say, I'm never doing that again. That's preventative suffering. That is God giving you an opportunity to say, what in the world am I doing to myself? And so he prevents you from stupid activity in the future. Then there's punishment suffering. That's probably, as citizens, that's the way you're most to live. Do something bad, go to jail. You know that that's the way it's supposed to work. It doesn't work as often as it should, I don't think. But do something, and there's a consequence to that. I mean, there's a punishment for what you did. I stole from you. I have to pay it back and more and spend some time in it. Then there's consequential suffering, and that is, even though sometimes we don't immediately pay the consequence for what we do. But, using smoking as an example, if you get lung cancer, later on in your life, after you smoke 2 packs or 3 packs a day for 2 decades, that's a consequence of the suffering. You can't blame anybody else, you did it to yourself. There are lots of things in life that we suffer for that are just simply the consequences of overeating, smoking, screwing up in your relationship, and you wake up and wonder, why am I alone? A lot of times there's just consequences to our life. And then finally, there's what I call Olivet discourse suffering. And the reality is if you believe the author of the Bible, who is God, the world is not going to be a pleasant place to be in the closer we get to Jesus' return. There's going to be famine. There's going to be pestilence. There's going to be wars and rulers against wars. There's going to be all these things that we're seeing, and it's for no other reason than God wrote the story, and we're getting towards the end. And so those are all different kinds of suffering. Maybe I missed some. It seems very comprehensive to me. But suffering is in this world, and it has been since original sin, and it will be at the end. And rather than trying to ignore it or deny it or say nobody should have to suffer, it's much wiser to be in a place where you are aware that we are all going to suffer, where the suffering comes from, and most importantly, what do I do with it? And that's why this message is called Destinations of Suffering. You can't always control where the suffering in your life comes from, but you can decide where you take it. You can be bitter, you can be better. Not because we're so wonderful, but because we have a God who specializes in resurrection and can turn our sorrow into joy. And so much of it in making a decision of what we're going to do and where we're going to take our suffering is who wins the battle of the Spirit versus the flesh. In Galatians chapter 5, verses 16 and 17, Paul writes, "So I say, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature." Or some translations say the flesh. For the sinful nature desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the sinful nature. They are in conflict with each other. Have you ever noticed that in your life? In your life? That there's a battle going on between the flesh and the Spirit. And I said this many times, but the missionary was out, and he talked to one of the nationals in the country that he was ministering in, and he said, how's your walk with the Lord going? And he said, well, in my heart it feels like there's this big white dog and this big black dog, and they were just constantly fighting. And the missionary said, well, which one wins? And the convert said, whichever one I feed the most. And that's really true. If you want to feed the white dog's going to win. If you like the black dog's going to win. And that's what it is. If we feed our flesh is going to defeat the Spirit in our life. But if we feed the Spirit can overcome the flesh. So make no mistake, there's a war going on inside of you. And oftentimes, the focus of that war going on between the Spirit and flesh is how you deal with the hard things in life, how you deal with the difficulties in life. When you suffer, is it a reason to have a pity party, or is it a reason to rise above? It's the Spirit versus the flesh in your life. And I was in studying this, and a pastor named Mark Driscoll, I heard him speaking on this, and it was pretty amazing to me, because we can have the same experiences in life and do completely different things with them. Now, you probably recognize Mother Teresa. She's the nun who went to India and is responsible, Sisters of the Poor, and is helping to ease a lot of suffering in India, where there is a lot of suffering with hungry people and sick people and that. The story of Mother Teresa's early life is when she was 8 years old, her dad died. And she was a daddy's girl, self-admitted. She and her dad just connected. She loved her dad. She couldn't imagine life without her dad. Something happened, and her dad died. And so she was just distraught about that. And her mom looked at her and said, we believe in God. We believe that God has a heaven where we go. The best thing you can do with your life is to be ready to meet God in heaven. And she did that. And she ran with it. The other man there is Harold Frederick Shipman, probably best known as Fred. Anybody know who that is? Harold Frederick Shipman is a British man who is generally regarded as the worst serial killer in the history of the world. Over 215 people he killed. And he also, when he was 17, he didn't lose his dad, but he lost his mom. His mom was a domineering figure who didn't really like very much, but that he was drawn to that. And then she got lung cancer, I think it was lung cancer, when Fred was 17. And because of his great love for her, it was so hard to watch her just wither away and to die. And he watched as the doctors and the nurses came in and they gave her more morphine and more morphine, trying to kill the pain, and yet still he saw her die. And so he got his doctorate He became a doctor, ostensibly because he saw his mom suffer and wanted to prevent that for other people. But the reality is he was so hurt by what he saw with his mom that he wanted to inflict that on other people. And so there's 215 people that he intentionally overdosed with morphine as a doctor so that he could watch them go through the same pain that his mom had to go through. Now you see what an incredible extreme example of what you do with your suffering. Mother Teresa took it, and we took it. Harold Frederick Kipling took it. Why is it Cyril killed a lot of I don't know. But he took it and created even more suffering in the world. And the truth is, in our life, we have that option as well. As I said, suffering is not an elective. It is a required course. What we do with it really determines our destiny and what we do with other people. What we bring to this world as our legacy. The reality is hurt people, heal people, heal people. The people that are still hurting people are the people who are still hurting. Those who are healing people are those who have healed. I think it was last week that we talked about how your misery can become your ministry. But we can comfort others with the comfort that we have received. We look at various people, and when I did mention was Stephen Arterburn, who spoke at the Promise Keepers Conference this year, and he talked about how he was exposed to pornography at the age of 4, and it became so much part of his life that he couldn't stop. But once he was healed from that, now that's his whole ministry. He wrote the book Every Man's Struggle to help men overcome what he had to overcome. So what we need to see in understanding the purpose of our suffering is our suffering can be used for good if we are willing to allow it to be used for good. And that takes getting out of the fight, because most people don't want to admit to suffering. Most people just want to pretend it's suffering. But if we're honest, we can use that for the good of other people. Because Satan will tell you, you're the only one that has that problem. You're the only one that's suffering. That's what the enemy wants you to believe. But the truth is, because we all suffer in so many different ways, I can best help in my healing process by someone who's gone through that themselves. So the possible destinations for suffering, number 1, suffering leads to sin. That's the case of Frederick Kipling. He suffered, and so it led him to evil. 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude. What's the attitude of Christ? So it's Philippians 2, that he regarded others as more important than himself. So he set aside the privilege of suffering. Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude, because he who has not suffered in his body is done with sin. As a result, he does not live the rest of his life for earthly human desires, but rather for the will of God. For you have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. The things that hurt us in life can drive us to sin. But I'm always amazed by what people say, for you have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans do. Think about that. Whatever your issue is, whatever sin you have that you've never defeated in your life, how did you end up time to do that? I mean, what good is doing that even one more day going to be in your life? Reach out to God and people for their help. The time already passed is sufficient for God. Make today a turning point. Verse 4, they think it strange that you do not plunge with them into the same flood of dissipation and the heap of use on you, but they will have to give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is the reason the gospel is preached, even to those who are not dead, so that they might be judged according to men in regard to the body, but live according to God, in regard to the Spirit. Suffering can lead us to further sin. I hurt, so I want everybody else to hurt. I I had to watch my mom suffer, so I want to see people suffer just like her. Destination 2 is that suffering leads to service. Suffering leads to service. We want to take the hurt, the pain, the suffering that we've gone through and make other people's lives better. 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 7 through 9 says, the end of all things is near. That's all the discourse second coming. The end of all things is near. Therefore be clear-minded and self-controlled so that you can pray. Above all, love each other deeply because love covers a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Love each other deeply because love covers a multitude of sins. And I've never been able to really fully figure out what that means other than to say it means what it says. We're all sinners, but when we really love others, those things can be covered up. Love is the resolve to be the solution to our sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. We just have that choice. When we suffer, we come to the wide and the red. We can choose the way that leads to more sin, or we can choose it to serve other people. When we serve together, in spite of suffering, we bring honor and glory to God. When we serve together, in spite of suffering, we bring honor and glory to God. 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 10 and 11 say, each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others, faithfully administering God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, he should do it as one speaking the very words of God. If anyone serves, he should do it with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. He said each one should use whatever gift he has received. So what that tells me is that we always should get whatever gift he has received. We all have the same gifts, and we'll look at that in the next verse. But everybody's got some gift. Whatever gift you have received, use it to serve others. Notice that he doesn't say each one should use whatever gift he has received to make him a lot of money. Doesn't say each one should use whatever gift he has received to get a lot of letters after your name. You should use whatever gift he has received to serve others. And that's how we minister God's grace in its various forms. Paul wrote about this in 1 Corinthians 12. He said, the body is a unit, though it is made up of many parts, and though all its parts are many, they form one body. So it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, slave or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. Now the body is not made up of one part, but of many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason cease to be a part of the body. That's something every pastor would deal with. People come up and say, well, I don't really have anything to offer. Everybody has something to offer. I never knew this was contagious, but apparently a lot of women in our church have been going through this thing where they're all breaking their toes. Started with Donna, Mary Ann, anybody else? And you don't think about your toes a lot until you break them, do you? Because they're just there. But every part of the body is important. And when it hurts the whole body. In verse 16, if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason cease to be part of the body. So if you say, well, my gift is only cleaning toilets, I'm not really part of the body. You don't cease to be part of the body. You just don't use your gift to serve others. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of security be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has arranged the parts in the body, every one of them, just as He wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts in one body. We have things in common. We're all sinners. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. We've all been given a gift. We come together just as a church, just like I do individually, just like everybody did individually, has the opportunity to take their suffering, whatever it is that's hurting you, and use that to serve. We as a church body have that as well, to come together, heart by heart, and either to serve people or to create a toxic environment in which people are lonely or questioning or whatever. That choice is that we will be a body that serves. It's individual, but also as a church. Finally, we will all give an account. We will all give an account. 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 5 and 6 says, "But they will have to give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead." Jesus is the only, God is the only one who is capable to do that. For this is the reason the gospel is preached, even to those who are now dead, so that they may be judged according to, so that they may be judged according to men in regard to the body, but live according to God in regard to the Spirit. The Bible says God started the world way back in Genesis 1. In Revelation 22, it's going to be all over. Everything that happens is written and recorded in God. I bought a new t-shirt this week. It says make Orwell fiction again. Get it? Oh, right, the 1984, and I love that t-shirt. You'll see me wear it, I promise you. But the truth is, I'm very against an intrusive government that has to hide this man's know what it is, it spies on me, and has to know everything about me. I think that according to our Constitution, we're free and we can be free from that government intrusion. But on a spiritual level, I acknowledge that as my neighbor, God knows everything that I do, everything that I think, everything that I text, everything that I watch on my computer. God knows it all, and I'm accountable for that. Even as a teacher dedicated to things God, He is God, we are accountable for Him. He knows, and Jesus came to earth to experience the suffering that He wanted to, so that we can be forgiven of our sins and free. Let's not use our freedom to sin, but let's use our freedom. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, and Lord, we just all have to acknowledge that it is our sin that is the heart and the source of suffering in the world. If there would be no sin, there would be no suffering. There is sin, we are all sinners, there is suffering. Lord, I pray that we will be accountable to you for all of our actions, all of our thoughts, and Lord, that we will take the gifts that you've given us and the experiences through suffering, through everything that we go through, to make this world a better place, to serve humanity with the goodness and the gifts that we have given us. In Jesus' name. We have our closing song. It's so vital that you are with Jesus, becoming judge. You know, it's like someone gets arrested for something, to look at the judge and say, "Who are you to judge me?" Well, there are laws and authorities that you, yes, that judge is authorized to judge you. No one can stand before God. The Bible says it's appointed to stand against God and the judgment. No one's going to stand before God and say, "Who is you to judge me?" So, the choices for humans are, do I take my sin and have it washed clean by the blood of Jesus and receive the grace that is offered to me, or do I go my own way? If you haven't made the choice for Jesus, then I'm happy for you to come out to the bulletin or afterwards. If you're watching online, I'm happy for you to hold me to our website, www.lifeway.com. That's the most important thing. And this is what we're going to feel led to pray for us as a body. Lord, I pray that we would all have the heart to be transparent in our lives with each other. You see everything. People don't see everything. But I pray that rather than continue, it's like he said, time already passed is sufficient for us to pray out the things that have been far too intricate in our lives. And Lord, I just pray for each one of us that having acknowledged that sin, that we will say, I'm going to fight that sin. And my Father can't leave alone, so I'm going to get other spiritual, strong, trustworthy people in my life because the time already passed is sufficient for me to have done and do for this life. And I pray for you.
His righteousness, He humbled Himself and carried the cross. Love so amazing, love so amazing. Jesus Messiah, the name above all names. Blessed Redeemer, Emmanuel, the rescue from sinners, the ransom from heaven, Jesus Messiah, Lord of all. Body the bread, His blood the wine, broken and poured out, all for us. The whole earth trembles and the veil was torn. Love so amazing, love so amazing. Jesus Messiah, above all names, blessed Redeemer, Emmanuel, the rescue for sinners, the ransom from heaven, Jesus Messiah, Lord of all. Jesus Messiah, neighbor of all names, blessed Redeemer, Emmanuel, and rescue from sinners, the ransom from heaven.